This is Story Talk, a series of online conversations featuring storytellers and artists from different parts of the world, especially curated for the 5th anniversary of StoryFest Singapore. Today, I'm going to be speaking with Sef Townsend, a storyteller based in London, and Sef and I are going to have a chat about the representation of gender in stories. Hi, Sef. Lovely to have you on Story Talk.
Hello, Kamini. It's lovely to be here.
Sef, you are a storyteller and you're currently based in the United Kingdom. You tell stories from all sorts of different cultures from around the world. And you also tell to a variety of age groups, from children all the way to adults. And tell us a little bit more about your storytelling practice and also how you use gender and the representation of gender when you tell stories.
Right. Well, it's true that I tell stories from all around the world because I travel around the world and I've been so fortunate to work in many countries of South America, in China, in the Pacific. I've worked in the Middle East. And every time I go to work, to tell stories, to give workshops, I always make sure that I have time to do some research. And some of this research comes directly into my work, directly into the stories. I mean, recently I was in the north of Argentina and the north of Chile, and I did a whole amount of research, finding stories which are now part of my repertoire. So yes, I do. I'm from a background of people from all over the world. I'm very mixed heritage. And that, in its way, has brought me to think, well, what is the culture that I tell from? I feel I'm connected to so many cultures. And therefore, that's why I do this sort of international storytelling. In terms of gender in my work, and I'm very interested in gender, and I've been very interested in various parts of the world have a notion of, how would I put it, two-spirit, that a person is not necessarily male or female, and certain persons actually show characteristics as children which lean away from what they might assume to have. And for example, in the indigenous peoples of North America, there is a notion of two-spirit, berdash or wigte. If a child shows that they're interested in doing what a girl does or a boy does, say it's a boy, that child might be raised more in the female area, and that child is considered to have a special role between heaven and earth and between the spirit realm and this realm. And that's always interested me. I mean, in the Pacific, they have fa'aine in Samoa or pakawahine in the Maori language, which means a person who's crossing over. In ancient Jewish religion, there are 5 genders. I mean, so this thing comes into my work. I want to just tell you something about my interest in India, in the Indian mythology. It's just absolutely okay. Until colonialism, this idea of double spirit or changing from one to the other. I mean, Nared, for example, he falls into a pond and comes out as a woman. And then, Shiva also changes. So all this is happening in Indian mythology. And there are ponds in Ahmedabad. There's a pond, I visited it, it's all dried up now, where people who went into that pond, they came out transformed. And to come to my storytelling, I have a story which is a traditional Scottish traveller story. Betsy White told it to Hugh Lupton, who told it to me, and it's part of my repertoire. And I tell it to children, and they like it. So we were talking about the Indian transformation, which comes up so often, and it's always connected with water. You go into water, one thing. You come out of water, another thing. Let's go to Scotland, an ancient Scottish story from the traveller tradition. There is a man. There's a bit before it, a bit after, obviously. He gets into a boat. The boat goes into the middle of the lake. And suddenly, it's not moving. And he goes like this. Normally he's got stubble on his chin. It's very smooth. His hair has become long, and he has a shape that is different from the shape he had before. Whoosh! He's on the other side of the lake. He gets married, he has children. So what my question is, did this story come from India? Where do stories come from? Do they travel? Why do the indigenous travelers of Scotland tell this story, which has similarities with stories in India? So this is my fascination. And as I said, I tell it to children and they like hearing it. But I'm going to tell you another story about working with children, where they didn't quite seem to like. I have a Swedish story, and I was working on gender issues. And at the moment in British schools, we're encouraged not to say boys and girls. We find other ways of speaking to them. We're acknowledging gender fluidity. And so I thought, well, this is a very suitable story, a Swedish story about a prince who somehow gets trapped or goes under a tree, and he's in the world of rats. And the rats are very kind to him. And he's very kind back to this rat who somehow attracts him. And the rat, because of all this kindness, is transformed back into the human form. Another male, another man. They look at each other. They become great friends. And then the prince, having broken the spell, takes this other prince back to his castle. They decide to live together because they like each other so much. Now, I didn't say they love each other with the children, but the children say, why wasn't that a princess? Because children are very, very socialized into until this point, very binary sense of male and female. So that's two opposite examples of gender work with children, one which they love, one which they find tricky because they want the prince always marries the princess.
But that's what they are used to hearing and used to seeing on television and different mediums. And, this brings me to a lot of stories that sound similar to the stories that you've shared, stories from India, stories from this part of Southeast Asia, where a person may be born with a certain identity, but throughout the different phases in their life, they take on another role, another identity. And it's not unusual for someone whom we would call as male to spend his 20s and 30s living as what we would call as female, and then later revert to something else. So this was very acceptable and part of all sorts of legends and mythology and stories. But you're right, all of this is now being, repackaged and represented because of, different things that have happened, different rulers, different religions, different kinds of boundaries and frameworks that oral tradition has had to navigate, right? And so these versions are not the kind of stories that are typically told. We have a more contemporary or repackaged story that's being presented. And so when I work with youth and they only know the current version or the easily accessible published version, I ask them about how they would feel if they knew the version that my late grandfather told me, where this this very male and strong and powerful king spent many, many years living as a woman. And so they ask, how come we don't know this part of the story? It's not to say that it's not available completely, but it is not easily accessible.
And yet it is there. I mean, of course, I've met these people, Hijra people, for example, who live their whole lives in the other gender. So yes, you're quite right about later versions. And much of this happened after colonialism. All over the world, where I say the British, but the French and the Dutch and the Portuguese and the Spanish, they didn't like this gender fluidity. In Greece, on some islands, you still have women who officiated all of the rites of passage, including funerals. Well, in the most of Greece, the church has taken that role. Christianity has taken that role. But when you go back to the ancient stories of Greece, the Amazons, there's actually archaeological evidence that the Amazons existed. I mean, they found a site where 37% of all the bones of these armed warriors were women. So the thing is, we know that in the folklore and actually in life itself, the parallels in real life, that women often took the role of men and vice versa. But colonialism said, no, this is not possible. I'll just go back to another story that also when I'm telling with children. With adults, it's fine. I mean, I do Jewish genealogical stories. Lilith is very important in that, and she's very much a woman and very seductive. But there are lots and lots of stories in Judaism about women taking the powerful role. There's Judith and Holofernes, and there is, what's her name? I just can't remember. Another one where the woman is a warrior and she takes over. But the story that children are always intrigued with, and I think humans generally are intrigued with, is gender fluidity is very intriguing to humans. We're fascinated by it. So Norse mythology, one of the favorite stories that children like when I'm telling is Thor's hammer. And of course, Loki dresses as a woman. Shakespeare often uses this thing of cross-dressing. And even though we know it's a man dressed in women's clothes, there is this fascination, almost a sort of, oh, what's going to happen next? How will they get? There is this fascination of cross-dressing going throughout Western culture as much as any other culture. So what I want to say, even though colonialism has said, no, it's right there in the cultures of the colonialists.
Sef, I know that you're a very busy storyteller, and you've also kept yourself busy during the pandemic by going online and sharing your songs, your nursery rhymes, lullabies, and stories with everyone around the world. So much generosity in your sharing. But do tell us, what are you currently working on, and what can we look forward to from you?
Well, I've just finished working with my colleague Anne Johnson on a new book. Let me see, the first book that we did was London Folktales for Children, and it's all about London, obviously. The next book is called London River Tales for Children, and it connects with our topic because of all the stories about London's river. There was one very famous woman, pirate, who came up the Thames to visit Queen Elizabeth. She was feared throughout the oceans, but all she was doing was protecting her people. And she demanded to see Queen Elizabeth to tell her that her people were being dominated in Ireland. And Queen Elizabeth then made everything much easier for her. And they had to speak in Latin because both were educated. The Queen didn't speak Irish, and Grace O'Malley, this pirate, didn't speak English. So it sort of connects, and there are lots of other stories there. So anyway, that's the present book, but there is a new one coming out in January, London River Tales for Children.
Wonderful. We're going to look forward to your second volume, your second collection of stories. Thanks so much for chatting with me, Sef, on Story Talk. Thank you so much.
Lovely being with you, Kamini. Bye-bye for now, and have a good time wherever you are in Singapore.
Thank you.
Bye.
So I've been speaking with Sef Townsend, storyteller based in London, and we've been talking about gender representation in stories. If you enjoyed this conversation, there's plenty more of our Story Talk series online available on the YouTube channel for StoryFest Singapore.